to Franchising Brand Stories. I hope you're all doing very well and you've had a good week in franchising. So, Franchising Brand Stories is brought to you by The Franchise Show. My other show that's on the Tuesdays, people will be familiar with that, same time. It's a weekly LinkedIn and other platforms live show, and we discuss the stories behind some of the nation's favorite franchise brands. It's live every week at 5:15 p.m. GMT, and we chat to founders, directors, and people at the hearts of these businesses. We break the show down into 3 distinct sections as well. So we start in the present, and we have a good chat about where we're at now. And then we go back into the past and see where it all began. And that's the main part of the show. And this is really a show where the community can participate. So during that middle section, if you've got some comments, some questions for Ben, then please let us know. And finally, we go back to the future, my favorite film, I like to use that expression, to what's going to happen in the future and exciting things happening. So they are the 3 chapters of the show. Before we introduce our wonderful guest today, and that is the wonderful Ben Brookes from Agency Express, I would just like to read a little piece about Agency Express. Solving the nation's erection problems. Ben's words. Since 1998, discover how a straightforward business with a post and a for sale board has grown to over 117 franchisees across the UK from Aberdeen to Cornwall. Agency Express now operates at the cutting edge of new technology and has been recognised by the BFA as the UK's best franchise in 2024. Ben Brookes MD is a real standout franchise professional and shares the Agency Express franchising brand story with us today. So Ben, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure to be here.
For being here. Yeah, no, thank you. Perhaps we could start with chapter 1, which is, where are you at now, and what is, for people that don't know, what is Agency Express? What do you do as a business?
Well, I think it's really important to note, Harvey, first of all, I didn't write the bit about me being a standout franchise professional. I, like most people that work in the franchise world, found my way here in a slightly meandering fashion. Agency Express, I'll give you the elevator pitch. What do we do? So we do solve the nation's erection problems. I've been pitching that for about 15 years to get used in a published article, and I finally got away with it today. So it's a great pleasure to share that with you. We put up boards for estate agents. So we've been doing what we do now since 1998. We have 117 franchisees around the UK, erecting, maintaining, and looking after the temporary signage for estate agents, letting agents, and commercial agents around the UK. So we visit something in the region of 125,000 properties every single month, or 1.5 million a year. And that will either be to erect a for sale board, so putting one up, changing the status of the board, so when the property becomes sold or let, or retrieving the board on completion when the property has changed hands. And each time we yank that handbrake on outside a property, that's how we make our money. It's a chargeable event, and the franchisee then receives a payment for doing so. We work with about 7,500 estate agents on a monthly basis, and that's about 600 or 700 property visits that we make every single hour through our SignMaster 3 system, which the franchisees use to manage their daily workflow and update their work rate. Is that enough for you, or do you need a bit more?
It's brilliant stuff, and it's a great introduction to the business, and I think that really gives people an understanding of, of who you are, what you do, and where you're at now. So really what I want to do now is move on to chapter 2, as it were, and chapter 2 is really taking us back a step now. I want to go right back to the beginning and find out really where it all began, and we can start to delve into why franchising was the choice. But perhaps you'd like to take us back to 1998. Actually,
well,
I was an estate agent.
It might take you back a bit further, actually, if that's all right.
Okay, that's great. Excellent.
So again, this story comes with a caveat. First of all, I have told this story somewhere in the region of 1,600 times. I've lost count of it because I share the same story with every prospective franchisee who comes to see me. And I try and make it slightly different every time, because otherwise I might as well just show them a recording. In fact, after we've done this today, I might just play them this recording, and then I won't have to tell them over and over again. Where does it start? Well, it goes back a bit further than 1998. So 1998 for me was the year that John Prescott was dancing to D-Ream. That's what sticks in my head. To Things Can Only Get Better, long before Brian Cox was famous for looking at stars and was playing a keyboard on the stage of Labour winning the general election. If we go a bit further back, all the way back to the wonderful 80s, so back to when they made your favourite film, that's really where the origin story of Agency Express begins. Now, as you can tell, I'm not in my late 60s, I feel like I am, but hopefully don't look like I am. So the origin of this story isn't mine. It's actually Steve Watson's, our chairman and the founder of Agency Express. The story starts with him. Back in the 80s, things were very different in the UK housing market to the way they are today. Everything is very slick and very organized and well formatted. If we go back to the 70s and 80s, and it wasn't like that at all. And the whole housing market was very fragmented. There's three main parts to buying a house or selling a house or moving or renting. And it starts with the individual who wants to buy or sell the house, finding an estate agent to market it for them. And the way they would do that is they would simply walk to the door of the estate agent in their local town or village and say, "Hey, do you want to sell my house for me?" And they'd say, "Yes, please." It's a little bit different now. That was the first step for someone selling a house. The second step would then be they'd need to get a mortgage. And so they would go and see their bank manager, their individual bank manager. They'd lie about how much they earned because, of course, the bank manager couldn't check very well back then. And they would offer them an endowment mortgage, which was a terrible idea, but we only found that out about 15 years later. And they would then go and look at the house that the other person had put on the market via the estate agent, make an offer, have the offer accepted, and then they would have to go and find a conveyancer, which would be a separate company to do the legal work. Okay. And what happened in the 80s is all of these things came together. And they came together because the bank industry in the UK started to become heavily involved in the estate agency industry. And that's because they wanted to sell people those endowment mortgages. So banks started buying out estate agency groups and chains. And they formed large corporate group estate agents that then existed all over the UK. So rather than having 2 or 3 or 4 local estate agency branches for Ben Brookes and Co., they became Bradford and Bingley estate agents, the Prudential, and lots of other names that people remember. People tend to remember the Prudential one with the guy from Wolverhampton saying, "We want to be together." That's the one they seem to remember.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. See, it's all tucked away back in the brain there, isn't it?
My wife and I quote that one sometimes.
In between watching Transformers and I'm trying to think of another one. Funny Bones. You get the Prudential advert on ITV. And the reason this is relevant to our story is Steve, at that point in time, was an estate agent, and he ran a company called Barnforth and Partners. He was the and partners bit of Barnforth and Partners. And Barnforth and Partners were an estate agency franchise. So our origins as a franchise company actually came from a different franchise. Steve was a franchisor before he created Agency Express. And Barnforth and Partners were a very successful brand in their own right. So successful, in fact, there are still some Barnforth franchisees that exist today, but they do trade under a slightly different structure. Barnforth and Partners were one of the companies that then got bought out by one of these corporate estate agents. It was a company called Alliance and Leicester, who you may or may not remember. All these names from the past. And Steve was tasked to stay on at Alliance and Leicester and become their franchise director. And he says he had an epiphany moment when he was sat around the board table with all these very middle class white men in pinstripe suits with nice watches, and he had to pull the sleeve down on his shirt because his Casio watch could be seen from the table. And the first task they gave him was to deal with the rebrands. All of these different companies that they had bought needed to be rebranded as Alliance and Leicester. And they would have liveried cars and shop fascias and business cards, letterhead, all that kind of stuff. And so he was tasked with going out and finding different companies to rebrand them all. And one of the things that needed to be rebranded was all of the for sale boards which existed outside people's houses. And of course, they were a myriad of different brands up and down the country, different sizes, shapes, qualities, etc. So, of course, he set out to find a single point of access, a single company who could manage all of this work for him, deal with the rebrand, so changing all of the boards that existed on the ground, and then manage them ongoing. And you can probably see where I'm going with this now. That company, of course, didn't exist. The final piece in the puzzle came when he went to see a small outfit which was trading up in the northwest, and they were doing what we do now, but on a much more local level. They had 1 or 2 vans in the local area. They were servicing the local estate agents, erecting and maintaining their signage, storing it for them, cleaning it, breaking it down, and looking after it. And Steve often says he'd love to say he had the idea lying in the bath or sitting under an apple tree, but sadly that's not the case. What we did was saw what someone else was doing and realized actually we could do it a bit better. So he left
and most of the best ideas come that way as well.
I think so. I think so too. Steve Jobs agreed, didn't he? He stole the iPad from Microsoft. So some of the best ideas come when you're not expecting them. But it was the franchise background for Steve was then the obvious channel to move into. You know, he understood the franchise world, the franchise industry, that was a scalable way to build a business with low risk and changing people's lives along the way. So Agency Express was born a few years later here in sunny Norwich, or not so sunny today, with our pilot operation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for letting us know that core, that history. It's so important. I think when people are looking at a business, to understand the beginnings and to understand the people behind it is such an important part of the journey that people go on to make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about legacy, isn't it? I think the individuals that create a brand that pervades all the way through then forevermore. You know, you can't remove the originator. You know, that will always be part of the core ethos of how the business works. And it's no different from us here. Steve is still with us, should probably say, although he doesn't have as much of an active hand in the business day to day. He tends to just come in periodically to ask me how things are going. I'll tell him everything's fine, and then he'll go and leave me alone again. But he is still here and a good mentor for me.
That's great. It's really interesting and good to hear that, you know, he's still there in the business and still has a passion and an interest in, you know, the fantastic thing that he started. Before we get into a few more questions, we just want to recognise a few people who have joined us here today. We've got the lovely and ever wise Simon Wise from Franrec. Great to have you here, Simon. We have Jason Caber from SEO Samba. Fantastic to have you here. Looking forward to hearing your questions for Ben as we move through the show. We've got Michael Carr here. Great to have you here, Michael. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And finally, we've got the lovely Robert Forst here as well. Or Bob, as we know him. So it's great to have you here, Bob, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts. A question I had for you, Ben, was what made you choose franchising as the growth model? You know, how did that come about rather than just growing organically or via traditional investment methods?
Yeah, it's the core question for all franchise businesses, isn't it? Why would you choose to use a franchise structure rather than just opening up operations yourself? I'm going to steal a bit of what Amrit said to you on a previous session, which is the phrase "skin in the game." I think it's one of the most important phrases that comes with franchising, albeit it's a bit blunt. With the nature of what we do, we're what's known as a van-based franchise or an owner-operator franchise. It means the same thing. The individual who's behind the wheel of the van, erecting and maintaining and servicing those boards, in the vast majority of cases, is also the person who owns and runs the business. And owner-operator businesses is kind of what franchising began as. If you go all the way back to the States in the early 1900s, franchising as a model was giving someone a format, a process to follow that they could replicate and create a carbon copy of a business in a different location. It's slightly different now because we have all these different structures and models of management franchising and multi-brand franchising, multi-unit franchising, and lots of other different ways of doing things. But ultimately, that core prospect of an individual franchisee being responsible for their own business, managing it, running it, looking after it, is what franchising is all about. So why did it make sense for us to go in that direction rather than just to employ loads of van drivers, shove them in vans, and open up lots of depots all over the country? It's to make sure that they are committed to providing a good service. We're a service-based business, so the estate agents that we work for, estate agents have a reputation. It's probably a nice way of putting it. They can be slightly gregarious creatures, and they do expect a high level of service. And the best way for us to make sure that they're getting that is for the franchisee to be the one, the person in the van to be the one who's directly receiving the benefit from providing a good service. So because that franchisee themselves owns their own individual piece of Agency Express, and because the harder they work, the more they will earn, and the better quality and service they provide, the higher the fee they can charge, it means that that work ethic, that drive, that focus earns them a better wage. And without that, if it was, if you took 100, this is the old 10-80-10 rule, which I'm sure you've heard before, Harvey, that if you take 100 people, stick them in a room, 80 people will be distinctly average at whatever the task is. If they're playing football or ping pong or running a franchise or whatever it may be, 80% will be exactly in the middle. 10% will be fantastic, and you'll wonder why they're there in the first place and not playing ping pong professionally. And then 10% will be wondering which side of the bat you hit the ball with, and probably eating the ping pong balls in the corner. And you'll spend more time with those 10% than you do with all the others. The thing about franchising is that pot of people tends to be more 10-90. So you get 90% of people who sit in the middle, and then you get 10% of people who sit at the top. There'll always be certain franchisees that create more challenges than others. That's the nature of people. But because they understand that they're committing, they're investing, it's not an investment just financially, it's personally as well, that they're gonna want it to succeed. And that drive is what makes franchising work. The other side of it really is about mitigating risk as well. If you have a conglomeration of small businesses, as we do, 117 franchisees around the country, if one franchisee finds himself in difficulty, it doesn't affect the other 116. The other 116 will continue to operate and provide a good service, and it won't directly affect them. So that means we can focus our support efforts to that one franchisee then who is, it could be a personal issue, financial issue, whatever it may be, whilst the remaining 116 are continuing and providing a good service. If you had employed individuals doing that, they would need a lot more management structure, a lot more people on the ground to hold their hands and make sure that everything is running correctly. So it enables a business to run leaner, more efficient, and it makes sure that you're changing other people's lives as well.
Yeah, I love what you say there about changing other people's lives. I think that's a really key thing with franchising. A few things, and we'll go on to Simon's comment in a minute, but a few things I wanted to pick up on what you said there. I liked that the harder you work, the more you get from not just monetary, but the more success, the more enjoyment you get. And yes, of course, the more financial reward you're going to get. Because, of course, a franchise model is a set of tools to do a job and a set of proven tools. When you buy a hammer, it's been proven that it's good at hammering nails in, but if you hold the wrong end of the hammer, it's still not going to work. And I like the fact that you said that, because I think sometimes people feel perhaps that when they're getting a franchise, everything will be done for them. And of course, like you say, you get really good franchisees and you get good franchisees as well. And they can exist together. One of the questions I had is do you think that if you had a franchisee that's struggling, by using the network of the other franchises, do they bring that franchisee up through sort of support groups, or would you say that that's something that you would do as a company, look after those? Do you use the other franchisees?
Yeah, it's both, isn't it? The franchisees themselves are their own network to a certain extent. There are elements of support that's provided from HQ, from top down, sales support and marketing support, and the kind of stuff that perhaps they wouldn't have the direct skills on the ground. A lot of our franchisees come from a real varied backgrounds. We've had milkmen and plumbers. We've had undertakers. I think we talked about the undertaker when I first spoke to you, didn't we? I was talking to Simon about that, perhaps. We've had people from service backgrounds, so firemen, policemen, Navy. And then we've had stockbrokers and previous businessmen and people who've come from a white-collar background. They all share the same drive to want to run their own business and to want to step away from the environment that they were previously in. But they don't necessarily have the same skills, traits, experiences. Some franchisors are focusing on a specific target group. One that springs to mind is tax assist. So they're specifically looking for people from a financial background, accountants and people who worked in accountancy firms. It's not like that for us. We no one ever woke up in the morning one day and said, "Hey, I want to put up for sale boards. That's what I want to do." People don't tend to come to us from that direction. They recognise that what we do is a fairly simple and straightforward business to run, that the potential is very good, and that they can be out and about working with their hands, and that's often what draws people to us. But going back to your question. They're their own network, so they have their own skills and their own experiences. So they can lean on each other for that support just as much as they can for us. And we run regional meetings for the franchisees. We have monthly web calls with them, and they all get to know each other pretty well, especially the direct neighbours, those who border each other within territories. That direct relationship that they build is as important as the relationship they hold with us at HQ. There's 117 franchisees. If an average franchisee has worked with us for 8 years, which is probably about right, that's pushing on 1,000 years of experience. That's a lot of experience to tap into, humongous amount.
That's a great way of putting it, when you combine that experience and you add that together. When you say that number, it's really incredible. And you answered some questions I had there about what type of people become franchisees. So that's fantastic. But look, let's have a look at a couple of questions here that have come in from Simon. I'm actually going to pick this one first because it relates quite well to what we were just talking about there. What skills and experience do franchisees need to exceed in your franchise? You mentioned something there about passion, and I always love that word when you're talking about franchising. If you've got the passion for doing something, whatever that is, and doing something well and providing that good service. But is that me or you then?
I think it's you. I hope it's you. I've been extremely careful to make sure. Oh, he's gone. He's back. It's okay, everyone. Don't worry. I'm gonna answer your question whilst you're poking your webcam. Harvey's got a new webcam, so I suspect it's that's caused the problem. What experience do they need? The phrase that I use when franchisees come and see us, and Naomi, our marketing head of marketing, is going to tell me off for sharing this bit of information, but I'm going to share it anyway.
It's an exclusive.
It's an exclusive. We talk about PLUs, people like us. And what we're looking for when someone comes in is a PLU. So it's not necessarily about their background, their history. As I said, we've had all kinds of different work experiences that have found their way to us. Sure, there are certain skills that are going to help. If you're a carpenter, we do have a carpenter in the network. Yeah, that's going to make life a little bit easier for you when we're working with timber posts. But ultimately, those skills we can teach, and that's part of the training process. We're going to teach you how to manage the kit. What we can't teach is the duvet. You can't teach someone how to throw a duvet off in the morning and get stuck in. I genuinely believe there are two kinds of people in the world. There's those who wake up in the morning and go, right, let's get stuck in, let's do it. Whatever it is we're doing, it doesn't matter what we're doing, let's do it to 100% the best of our ability. And then there are those people who get up in the morning and they kind of regret that they woke up. It's that moment in the morning when they go, oh, another day. And if you fall into that category, franchising is not going to work for you, because there is no one behind you telling you that you're brilliant and you're fantastic and you're wonderful and you're going to succeed. That's not what we're here for. We're here to support you and make the model work for you. But you've got to have the drive. You've got to want to get stuck in and get your hands dirty and keep yourself busy. And if you can't do that, then any franchise you're going to struggle with. But the nice thing about what we do is we're not looking for people who come from a sales background. A lot of franchise brands are wanting people that have a sales environment background or are comfortable with a cold sell process. We don't need to do that, because the nature of what we do, we have a lot of existing national account business. So around 40% of everything that we do from Aberdeen all the way to Cornwall is head office sourced. There are national account customers like the Cornwall Group and the Countrywide Group, who have thousands of branches all over the UK, have a sole agreement with us, and therefore we can provide that work to the franchisee.
Okay.
So it means that the franchisee themselves has the bread and butter on the table before they have to go and find the top side of beef. And for a lot of franchisees coming from employed backgrounds, or perhaps it's their first step into self-employment, that just gives them a lot more comfort to know that a certain amount of business is there and it's prepared for them, and their job is to build the cherry on the Belgian bun rather than starting at the bottom. And that can make things a lot easier, especially in the early days and those first few months, which are the most challenging for any franchisee.
That's a really good point. When you're starting that business and you're nervous about trying to find those customers, to be able to have that security of those national accounts, what sort of percentage would you say of a typical franchisee is those national accounts? Does it represent quite a big percentage? Or
well, if we worked across the whole of the UK, it's about 40%, but it differs depending on where you are in the country, because estate agents, of course, will have core areas that are important to them. And so the LSL group, for example, their core areas in the north. So in places like Newcastle and Manchester and Liverpool, they're going to have a very strong holding, but they have very few branches in the southwest. Yes. Whereas the Cornwall group or the Chancellors group, they're all very much focused in the south, the M4 corridor, etc. So they're going to be a much stronger brand in that part of the world. So it does depend. Some franchisees it's more, some it's less. But the advent of internet estate agents changed that game as well, because we work with companies like Purple Bricks, and they provide instructions all over the country. And so it means that we never know where the next instruction is going to come in. It's not going to necessarily be wherever the last one or the previous one was. It could be somewhere completely different. And that enables us to provide additional work for all of those franchisees everywhere in the UK.
Great, yeah. So I suppose those leads come in from those key accounts or those national organisations, and are they distributed by you as a franchisor to make sure they go to the right franchisees?
Yeah, exactly right. So our franchisees are territory based, which is quite common with van-based franchising or owner-operator businesses, where you'll have an allocated territory, and most of them in the UK will be done on postcode. So you'll have a certain number of postcodes which are specific to you, and they'll be detailed within your franchise agreement. And any work which then falls within that patch, and with us, it's divided by the specific branch or the location of the business, will then be provided to that franchisee. So if we sign a national account with Connell's Group and they've got offices all over the UK, if that office falls into to Slough, for example, it would fall to our operator there, Chris, and he would pick up that office, despite the fact it's been signed as a national deal. It would then be provided to him, and it would become his local client.
Get it. Fantastic. One of the questions I was going to ask you is, with 117 franchisees and all of this history, you must have met some real characters over the years. Is there any sort of standout stories about some success or some challenges that were overcome by a franchisee over the years?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right. You meet more characters in the franchise world than in any other. I mean, my previous life, I worked in property before I came to franchising, and there are people who are attracted to the property world tend to be of a type. So you meet a carbon copy of the same guy every time. Every time you sit down at a sort of black tie thing, it's the same guy sitting next to you, and you can more or less have the same conversation.
I went to a black tie thing recently wearing this hat. So
I know you did, because I was there too, and I saw you across the room. I was, but you were having far too much fun, so I didn't want to interrupt you. And the lovely thing about franchising is because it envelops so many different industries, so many different types of people. Your massive multi-unit stuff, and Holiday Inn and McDonald's, and then you'll have companies like Barking Mad and the childcare franchises, which are just completely different types of people that are being attracted to our world. Interesting people that I have met. I've met a lot of people without driving licenses, which is a bit of a precursor for what we do. I had a guy once who told me, he said, "It's okay, I'm going to get my wife to drive me around and I'll do the work." And I said, "Look, this is not going to end well. I mean, I can just about manage 3 hours in the car with my wife, but we have to have a break. So if you're doing 8 hours a day every day, you're gonna lose your marbles fairly quick." I've had, what else? I had a guy who only had one arm, and that was an interesting one. We sort of had a conversation about how that would work, and he was adamant his DIY skills were fantastic and it wouldn't be a problem. But in terms of success stories, who's the one that sticks out the most? We had a franchisee in Derby, a guy called Dave, We have a lot of people called Dave. You can literally answer the phone in our office and say Dave or Steve, and the chances are they'll say yes. And Dave in Derby was a long-distance lorry driver, and he had never considered being self-employed. He had no concept of what that would entail. You know, the idea of registering for self-employment or VAT was absolutely alien to him. And we worked with him very closely to make sure that he was comfortable. The doing was the easy bit for him. So actually putting up the boards and dealing with the estate agents, that was the easy bit. It was the mechanics of business that was felt difficult. And I asked him the same question I ask everyone on the franchise interview. So when they come to see me or when we do it online, which is, what's success to you? What's the goal here? Because quite often people will say money. Okay, that's fine. Understand that, as you say, we're all in business to make money. Nothing wrong with that being the driver. But more often than not, there's another sort of core reason that person's in front of you. And for Dave, he said, I want to put my kids to bed at night. That was his core reason. He said, driving trucks all over the country is great and you can make lots of money doing it if you're good at it. But I'm away 6 nights a week. So I see them 1 night a week. That's it. So I want to be able to come home every night and put the kids to bed. And then when I would check in with him periodically for his catch-up meetings and calls, I would always ask him, did you put your kids to bed tonight? And he said, yes. And so that was the one that stuck with me. He then sold his business about 4 or 5 years ago, for a very healthy return on what he did. And he was still putting his kids to bed when he left us. So yeah, that's one that stuck out.
Great story. That's a great story, and this is what this show's about, to discover those stories and understanding someone's why.
Yeah,
it's so important in franchising. I always ask people about what their vision is, how do they see their day to day, and why do they want to do it? What's brought them to that point? How do they see it? What excites them? And that was such a powerful story, I think. To understand that why.
It's amazing how often you have that conversation with someone and they don't know for themselves. And as you delve into them more and ask them about, when we're talking about PLUs, I want to understand them as people. Amrit talks about this as well. You want to understand them as the human side of why they're there.
Yeah.
If someone just says, I just want to make money, I just want to be successful, yeah, that's great. All those things are great, but there's a reason how you've arrived here. So if you don't know what the why is, then let's unpick it, because we can probably figure it out together, and more often than not we do. And that means you've just got that touchstone point that you can go back to and say, well, have we achieved what we wanted to achieve? Take the finances out of it for the time being. The original why, is it there, and does it work?
Yeah. Finding the why. I think that's definitely a take home from today.
Either that or a Sesame Street episode, one or the other.
I hate to say it, but it is your microphone that's making that noise, by the way.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry.
It's not a problem, but we can still hear each other. It's only an occasional thing, so it's all good. Let's have a quick look at a question here that young Bob has put. And I just wanted to touch on the last part of this, actually, because FDDs are more US related here. But how we spoke a little bit about what type of person becomes a franchisee, but how do you sort of attract new franchisees to the business? Is it sort of traditional methods via aggregator platforms, or is there some more unusual ways that people could hear about your business?
That's a really good question, and one that actually is at the top of my list of issues that exist within the UK franchise world. We've all fallen into this trap of operating in exactly the same way, trying to find franchisees for the last 30 years and expecting a different outcome. So everyone turns up to the franchise exhibition, you go, yeah, this is going to be the one, this is it, and then at the end of the 2 days they go, oh yeah, it was okay, we took this amount of leads, and that's okay. But the truth is that there's been a massive shift. The reason why we're talking to each other on your platform today is because people engage with content differently. Yeah. And so there has to be a step change in terms of how we present ourselves. How do I find franchisees? Of course, we use all the traditional methods, the platforms that exist out there, the franchise exhibitions, the web sessions, and so on. But I try and just make sure I'm as visible as possible so that we're always talking about what we do. We're always vocalizing what we do. We're always at every event, every invitation to talk about it, producing lots of content which goes through the social channels. And I think largely now, when we are trying to attract, perhaps Gen Z is a little bit too far, but certainly Gen X, Gen Y to the franchise world, they're going to find you in a different way, and they're going to come to you a lot more qualified than what we would have had previously. If you go back to the 90s and the noughties days, someone would come to you completely green to a franchise exhibition. They'd walk up on the stand and say, well, tell me about what you do.
Yeah.
And by the end of that 10-minute conversation, they may be quite interested. Whereas now someone will come up on the stand and say, yeah, I've seen you. In fact, I was talking about this earlier, that you probably get this as well. One of the really strange things about our world is someone will walk up to you and talk to you as if they know you. So they'll come up and they go, oh, hi, Ben. Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, just tell me about this, about your business. And I'm standing there thinking, have I met you before? And I can't remember you. And it's not that. It's that they've seen one of these videos and they feel like they know you. And that's what we need to cultivate, that sense of being being known before they reach out to talk about the business.
What a great answer to that question, may I say, because someone feeling like they know you, what a statement that is there. Because like you say, if you do things like this and you put your name out there, and people have the opportunity to be able to ask questions and see who you really are, you got it. You then start to be able to talk to people that are pre-qualified in some way, not just from your benefit, but for their benefit as well. They've already seen who you are and, and how you support and the sort of things you're going to say and do. And that can really help them with making a decision as to whether it's the right journey to
yeah, absolutely. And that franchising is right for them as well. I try and make a concerted effort when someone comes through the sort of recruitment process to talk to them about franchising in general and what it means, but also whether our brand is right for them. It may well be, I've had people come through before and say, well, actually what I'm looking for is a management business. I want to have lots of people working. And I say, well, look, that's not us. We're not for you. But here's a list of companies that I know them personally. I've worked alongside them. I'd happily recommend them. In fact, I'll happily introduce you to the person you need to speak to. And that's one wonderful thing about the franchise community, because we're not majoritively actively in competition with each other. We can do that, and we can support each other's businesses, and that gets the franchisee into the right place.
Fantastic. And we've got a question here from Simon. Let's have a little look at this one. What does a typical day in the life of a franchisee look like? We
put up boards, Simon. I thought we covered that one at the start, hadn't we?
Seems pretty simple, doesn't it?
What does a day in the life look like? Well, everything that we do runs through our online system, SignMaster. So SignMaster is the sort of the keystone, the linchpin that holds everything together, and has been the point of heavy investment for us since about 2002. So the franchisee, first thing they're going to do each day is produce their work list. So they're going to log into SignMaster. It'll provide them with all of their job locations. So the different customers will have made their requests via the agent's portal. They'll appear in the front end of the system for the franchisee. The system will plan the route, so it'll tell them the most efficient way to travel between the stops. So they'll have 40 to 60 stops each day to cover. So 40 to 60 handbrake pulls outside properties. And each one of those stops, they're going to need a stock item, and they're going to need to know how to get there. So once they've planned their route, that will be downloaded to the mobile app, which then exists on their Android device in the van. They will go to their stores, collect the kit and equipment they need for the day. So the boards, posts, slips, etc., that we're going to use, the signs to complete the actions. And then the app will guide them to each stop. So they'll simply push, take me to job 1, and it will use its very clever bit of software inside to take them to the first location. When they arrive there, they'll conduct the action. They may add one of our special agency QR codes to hyperlink the property details back to a QR scan. They may add additional wording information, all kinds of other bits and pieces that can happen on site. And then we take a picture to show the agent what work's been done. And that's updated live back to the system, so the agent can see exactly what's happened. They're going to do that 40 to 60 times a day. And there's also going to be weaved into that perhaps visits to customers, checking on people, making sure they're happy, maybe visiting new clients and talking to them about what we do. And then at the end of the day, once they finish the last job, the app will even route them home. So it'll tell them how to get back home from wherever they are. It's amazing how when you're driving around, You see parts of where you live that you never knew existed,
Yeah.
and then you eventually find that you kind of turn up on a road and think, oh, I do know where I am. I found where I am, and then you'll head home. The way the system works is it deals with all the invoicing, all of the credit elements, all of the debt control. It all happens through SignMaster, so there's no paperwork. So the franchisee gets home. Normally, there's a few emails maybe to answer, or some stock to take in. But largely, that's it. We try and make sure that the day-to-day operation is as straightforward and as simple as possible. We went through a process about 5 years ago it's longer than that, 10 years ago, we won our first BFA award about assessing the business at a sort of microcosmic level, going all the way down to the granular elements. Where can we strip time? Which bits are time soaks through the day? Stock elements, routing, planning the day, how can we literally break all those component parts down to granular levels to make it easier for the franchisee to be able to conduct more work and to finish earlier, and that's where we are.
That's fantastic. That also answers a question that I had about infrastructure and support. You mentioned a lot there about those software systems and really what sort of support that a franchisee could expect. Were there any other elements of support that you'd like to talk about that a franchisee could expect to help them through their day-to-day?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the most important parts of support for a franchisee is sales support. It doesn't get talked about a lot. There's different kinds of franchises, of course, that exist, and lots of in the food and beverage world or B2C, where you're going direct to consumer. It's less relevant. That sales environment is less important because you're providing a product, you're going out to the consumer, and so you're going to use the traditional marketing methods to find them. If you work in a direct sales environment, so you're a B2B customer, and so therefore you have to take your product or service to another company and engage with them and try and get them to use it, that can be really daunting if you've never worked in that world. Just the idea of walking through the door and talking to someone, for some people, is terrifying. When we work in what we do, like being you, Harvey, you get used to speaking to people, and that becomes very natural, and you find it very easy just to strike up a conversation. It's not hard. But for a lot of people, that is mind-numbingly terrifying. So it's one of the things that I stress at the early stage, that we're here to help you with that. We will literally walk through the door with you and talk to you with that person, with that customer, and show you how we approach them. What questions do they ask? What kind of objections do we receive? What steps do we follow then after we've had that first conversation? How long is it going to take from that first conversation, that first touch point, through to actually converting them into a client? And most importantly, what do you do when that doesn't happen? How do we respond to that? If they turn around and say, actually, we've assessed everything you've said, we've listened to all the information, it's not for us, thanks very much. What do we do with them then? That's the easiest way to fall down in the early stage. You've got a great product, a great service, you've got a brilliant franchisor behind you, but your fear ties you to the desk. So having that support, that person to hold your hand through that, I think is the most important thing. And every franchisee that starts with us has a dedicated person who will be doing that with them and for them, and then ongoing as well. It doesn't stop after the launch phase, but the launch phase is the most important bit, because until you're 100% confident with the product or service that you're offering, this new system that you're now expected to be able to go and be an expert on, that can be quite scary. And so we want to try and take as much of that fear away as we can.
That's fantastic, because like you say, I think that's sometimes you could think about that as two different types of people. Someone who could do the more physical part of the job, and someone who's more in the sales part. So it's really good that you help blend that together and support people with both of those elements of running the business.
And trying to make it targeted specific to the individual. This idea of training courses being rigid and structured in the franchise world is well documented, and that's how it should be. There are certain core elements which should always be covered and imprinted upon that franchisee when they come through. But equally, it's important to recognize that everyone's different, and their skill base, their knowledge, their experience is different. And that's why when we run our training courses, we run them with relatively few amounts of people on each course. We won't bundle 5 or 6 together. We'll run them with 2 or 3. And that means we can really get to know that individual whilst they're with us and tailor the way we're approaching the training with them to make sure they're getting the most out of it.
That's fantastic. I mean, getting to know people is key to any business relationship, and communication is so key to that. We've got a couple of questions, but I'm going to leave them to the last part of which we're going to come up to. There was one about expansion, and there's one a little bit about technology, but we're gonna leave those just for a couple of minutes or so, because I had a couple more questions before we move on to chapter 3 and the final chapter of today's discussion. I wanted people to understand what we've talked a lot about, what happens when you're a franchisee and the support and the types of people. What does the kind of the prospect journey look like for a potential franchisee? So when someone makes that inquiry, how do you take them through that process?
Yeah, it's amazing how much that's changed post-COVID. The people, it was like this huge learning curve, wasn't it? Everyone running Zoom quizzes at home to keep themselves entertained during lockdown. But as with all challenges, there will be positive elements that come out of it. And the one positive I think that came out of that experience for everyone was they got much more used to using multiple levels of technology to interact. And so whereas before the franchise recruitment process, so once that first contact point had happened, there would normally be 2, 3, 4 phone calls running through various different bits and pieces. Then they would come and see you and you'd have a full interview. They would sit down and go through that. A lot of franchisors will use discovery days in that process, but I've always preferred to meet with them one-on-one. As I said, I think it's important to get them to know on an individual level. And then normally there would be a follow-up pack of information, which would be provided, what we would call a second stage pack. So cash flow projections, copies of agreements, and all that kind of stuff. And then ultimately the franchisee would make a decision to proceed or not. But now I have so many. It used to be, I think I count them at 12 to 14 touch points was common with a franchisee joining us. I would say it's closer to 40 or 50 now on average. Touch points you'll have with the franchisee before they finally make the decision, put pen to paper. But that's a good thing, because there are now lots of sort of micro touch points rather than this sort of structured, rigid format. The first thing I will do is I have it in every single one of my emails. My calendar is open and anyone can book into it. I use a little AI tool which enables someone to get access to my calendar, and they can pick the time they want to speak. And putting that power back into their hands and say, well, you tell me when you're free. I'm not going to say these are the times that I can talk. You tell me when you're free, and I will make sure I'm there and I'm able to talk to you. And then we break them down into different parts that they need to understand. So first of all, we talk about franchising, as I said, and what that means and what the relationship looks like between us. And the analogy I always use is a franchise is like a good marriage. It should be...
it's been talked about before, actually, on this show. It's like that,
yeah. It's a good marriage, and that needs input, effort, and commitment from both parties. And if one party has more control or power in the relationship, it will fall apart. And so it's a symbiotic relationship. It has to work for both. That symbiosis in franchising is the cornerstone of what we do, right? So we cover that off first, and then we look at the mechanics. So actually the next follow-up Zoom call that we'll do, or web call, will be about the system and what they do day to day and how they'll do it and what that looks like. And we talk about how many stops they'll make and how we cover the route planning elements and all the sort of the physical hands-on mechanical stuff. Then the next one will be about finance, so about money. Do they need finance from a bank to start their business, or are they self-funding? Even if they are self-funding, perhaps considering finance might be useful for them. Sometimes people say, oh, no, I've got capital, I'm happy with that. And actually, when we delve into it, they'd be stretching themselves fairly thin. And we can say, well, look, one of the biggest killers of small business is undercapitalization, not making sure you have enough cash on hip to support yourself through the early phase. And so we break it down into those kind of component parts. We'll then encourage them, obviously, to come and see us here at HQ, to spend some time with the franchisee, so an existing franchisee within the network, speak to 3 or 4 of them and visit one if possible as well, and get their hands dirty and see what it's like actually putting up a board. And then normally by the time we get to that stage, I'm starting to understand where they are and what their sort of personal feelings are towards what we're doing. And after you've done this for a long time, as you kind of know, it's a bit like dating. When you sat down with someone, you think, this is going well. I know this is going in the right direction. Or sometimes you say, actually, I can feel that this isn't quite right. And
it's a joint trust journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you just know, and they just know as well. And it just takes time to get to know one another to see whether you're going to do business together.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. I wanted to end this particular section with asking you, and we are going to run over a little bit today, but it's been just such a fascinating conversation that if it's okay with you, we're going to continue a little bit longer.
You can flatter me all night long, Harvey. That's fine.
I just wanted to know how you would summarize, or if you could summarize, what the mindset of you as a franchisor is, if you
Wow.
could do that in a fairly concise and short way. It's a tricky one to summarize, isn't it?
Cool. That's a tricky one. I think a franchisor in a lot of ways has a similar mindset to a franchisee. But rather than the franchisee's position of success is about themselves and about their individual business, as a franchisor, it's a bit like being a parent. You have 117 children, and they're all at different stages. They're all at different points in their life cycle. We use the term, don't we, in franchising a lot, about the life cycle of a franchisee, that they go through stages. So there'll be at different points in their life cycle, but ultimately what I want is for them to be happy, healthy, and successful, much like a parent would want for their children. But because that looks different to all of them, what that position of success and happiness is, my mindset is always about, well, what does that mean to them? So when I pick up the phone and speak to that individual, how do they like to be approached? What they like? What kind of terminology do they like me to use? Do they want me to be colloquial and friendly? Do they want me to be their dad? Do they want me to be their boss? How do they want me to approach that? So I'm always in the back of I'm always overthinking how I'm approaching someone, I suppose. But as a franchisor, your job is to try and make them as successful as you can, and then they bring success back to the business. Because if you're doing everything you can to make their business work, it will work. Then they'll be happy, and then they'll pay you back in spades, and that's what it's all about. It's
got to be a win-win, hasn't it? It's if they are successful, you are successful, and the other way round. So it's fantastic to hear. Look, that's fantastic. We're going to move on now to the third and final chapter of today's discussion, and we're going to go back to the future.
The epilogue. You weren't joking about that, were you? I thought you're going to zoom in on your hoverboard next time. I was so disappointed that never became a thing.
Oh, me too. I was waiting for 2015 for this to happen, and there's no hoverboards. But there you go. So the third and final section is about the future and some things that you might have planned in the future. I'm going to bring up a couple of comments here because it's really nice to involve the people that have taken the time to be with us today. Now, Bob's put here, what is the ultimate goal with the number of franchisees that you've got in the UK? Is it still to expand within the UK, or have you got sort of plans to take things to other regions around the world?
It's an interesting one because the UK housing market is very specific. The way we work and we have this focus on buying a house almost from the day you can talk. Your parents say to you, well, you grow up, you buy a house, maybe you get married and you get a good job, and it's kind of ingrained in our culture. Other parts of the world, it's not like that. If you go to lots of parts of Europe, it's very, very common that you will rent a house or a flat forever, and there isn't this expectation that you will buy. So what that's led to is this heavy focus on housing movements in the UK, so houses selling and houses being leased. And so that's created an environment where estate agents are hugely prevalent. That, coupled with the high density of property that exists in the UK, it's a perfect blend for us doing what we do. So it would have to be a very similar marketplace for us to be able to migrate the brand to another part of the world. Interestingly enough, they're all sort of ex-British colonies that have similar housing markets, and it kind of makes sense. The housing market probably would have been taken over along with the colonialism. So Australia, South Africa, parts of the US, it could work as well. But my focus, my personal focus, well, first of all, thanks, Bob, for the 127 franchisees. That's 10 more than I had when I started the call. So it's been a good day. Is to really make sure that the franchisees that we have are achieving the goals that they want. So if we work with around 60% of all UK estate agents in the marketplace at the moment. So if you walk down the high street and you see for sale boards up, we probably put up one in every two of those, if not more. then as far as I'm concerned, that's 40% we don't work with. So there's a huge amount more to go, and I won't be happy until the Monopolies Commissioner banging on my door telling me that we need to sell a bit of it. That's when we know we're doing it right. But what we've started to do is bring in other earning mechanisms for the franchisees as well. So we partnered with a company called the KeySafe Company, so give them a nice big plug, who get us to install small KeySafe lockboxes at properties. So these are for vulnerable adults or the elderly. And a key will be put inside and the box will be locked. We have the perfect mechanism to get those boxes installed around the UK. We've got guys with the right tools and they're rotating residential areas every single day. So we work with those guys, and that enables another revenue stream for our franchisees. So the core focus is going to be the UK, but never say never. If Bob wants to come and buy a master license for Florida, then he's very welcome.
Well, maybe that's the extra 10 that he's talking about.
That's his franchisees, right? Okay, makes sense now.
That's great, and it's really interesting to hear, first of all, how you're wanting to nurture, support, and grow here within the UK, and make sure that is solid and has a great foundation. And then you're going to look at other markets that are, that match. So I think that's fantastic. Thanks for your question, Bob. We're going to take one more because we really are now getting towards the end, and I'm sure these lovely people have got lots of things that they've got to do. But let's recognize the fact that we've got Don Cohen here. Great to have you here, Don. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to take a final question here. Well, a question, but a point here from Johnny. And Johnny's put about technology. You mentioned, which I thought was fantastic, the sort of diversification of the model, which allows for expansion. But is there any new technology? I mean, you seemed quite that there's a lot of tech in the business already to help people with, iPads or tablets and things like that. But are there any new things on the horizon?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some really interesting stuff that's coming. There's a lot of things that seem to catch us quite late in the property world and in the UK as well. We're quite late adopters of a lot of things. You still talk to people in the UK about Venmo and they've got no idea what it is, which is strange because it's fairly ubiquitous pretty much everywhere else in the world. So we're quite late to adopt stuff. Something which we introduced last year was agency QR, which enables one of our franchisees to erect a generic QR code panel underneath the board, and the system automatically redirects back to the location that the estate agent has provided us with when they instruct the board. It means they can track the number of scans and they can harvest the information. So it turns the board from being a passive element into an active element. There's going to be further development in that with things like Bluetooth beacons, NFC chips. But the one that I think is most interesting and perhaps has the biggest legs ongoing is augmented reality. It's very easy to create an augmentation to a board so that you can hold your phone up to it and perhaps you could see the asking price, or you could see inside the property and see some details of what it looks like. All the technology exists and we've done a lot of the hard work that sits behind it, but it's just finding a way to get the public to understand what it is. That's actually the hardest bit. One of the other things that the COVID lockdowns gave us was understanding what QR codes were. QR codes have existed since 1992. They were created by Toyota, by Denso, in fact, to track their parts. That's what they were created for. And it's only now, 30 years later, that we finally figured out how to use them in Nando's and Pizza Hut when you walk in and scan the table, right? So sometimes you have to allow the technology to come to you. And I think we're getting there with those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, that's fantastic. There's just one more here. There you go. That's a fantastic one to have up as we conclude things. So we have now got to the end. I wanted to thank you, Ben, for sharing your story with us today on the show. It's been a fascinating story to hear how you've grown and support and the success that you've had. And I think for anyone watching this today and watching this in the future, it'll give a real insight into what's behind the brand. So I wanted to thank you very much for your time today.
Huge pleasure to be on. Always great to be in.
Fantastic. And I also wanted to thank everyone else for being here in the audience. It's always a show that's driven by the people within the community. So a big thank you to all of you. So please join us next Thursday, same time, same place, 5:15. p.m. GMT, when we will hear another fascinating brand story. So until then, I hope you have all have an amazing week ahead, and good night and goodbye.